One of the things that strikes me from both of your stories that you shared as well is, it's while there is the gender bias, it's not an equal gender bias for everybody, right? So
Mm.
there's the gender bias for rural, marginalized women of color is very different. So in your work, I think sometimes it'll be helpful for people to connect with that statistics that I showed, for example, right? Some stories that you might be able to share that there's a woman at the grassroots doing amazing work, should have been funded, didn't get funded. Any stories that you could actually share so people can relate to what it means to support a woman like that. Lisa, do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe because we're already at that age where there is actually a lot of interest in investing in women,
Mm-hmm.
that actually there is money available for such for many types of women, right? Including the marginalized, because of course you know that microfinance is there and it's focused on women, but you talked about the missing middle, yes. But I mean, at this day and age where everyone wants to contribute to investing in women, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think one major problem that I see exists in gender lens investing or investing in women is that there's a tendency to look at the problem as just access to finance,
Mm-hmm.
which I think does not relate the lack of access to finance of women to the overall problem of gender inequality as a whole, and the need for women entrepreneurs to actually become enablers of women at the grassroots, because for example we had this we are promoting the benchmarks for transformational partnerships on women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains, and it's a set of benchmarks that we try to introduce to small and medium enterprises to actually become enablers of
Mm-hmm.
women at the grassroots, right?
Yeah.
And one of the main insights that we have gotten from giving these workshops to
Mm-hmm.
women entrepreneurs was actually, they say, the biggest insight I got from this is that I need to be empowered. I need to have a gender lens, I don't have that.
I
And
see.
unless I have that and I learn the tools and I actually am able to have the knowledge and skills to do that, I won't be able to, contribute to women's economic empowerment. It will just be me who would be empowered as a woman. But what does that mean in terms of women's economic empowerment? So the workshop actually results to a process where they realize that that they themselves need empowering, right? That they
Mm-hmm.
came into the workshop thinking that they are actually enablers and empowerers of women, who are their workers, who are their suppliers, right? But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, they say, oh, I need empowering. I need to have this gender lens. I need to change my mindset, because if I don't, and I need to get this knowledge and skills. That's the reason I think why resource institutions that provide a gender transformative perspective in introduce the gender transformative perspective to women entrepreneurs is very important, because these are the kinds of resource institutions who need to work with investors to actually change the way that gender lens investing is happening. I don't know if I'm I am
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting across the message that
So you
I
have two
see is a
aspects.
problem.
So you're saying that two aspects of it that needs to be addressed, right? There's the aspect of gender lens investing itself, recognizing that just investing in a woman entrepreneur alone is not enough.
Yeah.
A woman entrepreneur in turn needs tools and resources to make sure that they are also doing gender lens. So that
Yeah.
it's through the whole value chain.
Yes.
That's kind of
Yes.
what you're saying, right?
Precisely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And most of the time, it's just access to finance for women entrepreneurs. That's
Mm,
actually, of
correct.
course, Angels of Impact is doing something beyond that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking about the many
Yeah.
investors,
Mm-hmm.
even those that are investing in women
Yeah.
across various value chains, especially in agriculture, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I see that many, because of course, I think for when you work in the craft subsector, like I think many of your stakeholders are. There's a bigger awareness about the need to empower these women, because most of the stakeholders in the craft subsector are really women, right?
Yep.
But when you talk about agriculture and agricultural value chains, where when you say farmer, fisher, it's really a man, right? But the women are there, they're working, but they're invisible, right? So I think that's where women entrepreneurs, and I would say women social entrepreneurs, even, because not even all social entrepreneurs have this gender lens, right? They're still just starting to appreciate the need for uh, a gender transformative perspective. Because even when you talk about a gender perspective, you can just be aware, you can be responsive, but you can be gender transformative. No? And there's a big difference between just being aware, where you try to, be aware that women have different needs, right? And then you become gender responsive, where you respond immediately to the needs that they have. But being gender transformative means you also have to respond to, or to assist women to overcome the barriers, the structural barriers to participation and empowerment, such as cultural norms, right? Cultural norms that women are the main players of domestic of unpaid care work and domestic work, right? So all of these things, I think, need to be taken into account.
Great, good advice. So don't just count women. Just because you invest in a woman, you need to make sure there's a gender transformative policy into it.
I'd actually like to give a specific example, Laina, because we made a case study in Indonesia, where actually it was a case where there was investment in a woman led a woman-led project of setting up a social enterprise, a cooperative project that was doing that was manufacturing and selling coconut sap sugar, right? And so they engaged the women in a process of becoming producers of the coconut sap sugar and exporting that, abroad. This was a social enterprise. And so they were very happy that the women were already contributing about 50% of household income, right? But when we actually did a study about the impact of this project on the ground, we found out that the women were not even considered members of the cooperative. That they were actually the members of the cooperative were the men, right? Because it's women, the household heads are actually men. And so to become a cooperative member, you had to be a household head. There was even this specific case where the woman was actually the one climbing the coconut tree and getting the coconuts, and had a husband who was actually disabled, right? But still, she was not the member. It was the husband who was the member. Right. And then when we studied the impact of this project, where the women were already contributing a big percentage of the household income, we found out that women were spending about 4 hours a day in sleep. They actually had to do work at night.
So it wasn't beneficial
and it was not really beneficial to them in the long run, right? But they were benefiting the family in the short term, but in the long run, we are sure that they will have health issues and health difficulties, right? Because they were sleeping 4 hours a day, because they have given up part of their sleeping hours to doing economic activity on top of their unpaid care on domestic work, right? So I mean, those are the
That's
kinds
a very
of
good
things.
example. That's a very good, because there's two additional layers you're bringing up. One is just because there's increased income is not enough. We need to go a little bit deeper and see that. And then there's also the agency. These women were treated as beneficiaries, right? And not as leaders and change agents. So great points. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it took so much time.
No, great points. Thank you. Gail, would you like to jump in?
Sure. What a powerful perspective, Lisa. And I'm going to come from the investor point of view, right? And touch on some of the similar issues. Let's start with care, right? And I want to relate that to trust and risk assessment. I've had more founders than I can count, and one account tell me how the fact that they got engaged, that they were having children, adversely and significantly impacted their fundraising. and their negotiating power. And so the idea that a carer or someone with a family is going to detract from returns or from overall, productivity is something that's, I think, unspoken but always there. And so it made me wonder: is it bad if the CEO or the founder or an entrepreneur does not spend every waking hour on their business? Should that be a bad thing? I think when you talk about being empowered as an entrepreneur, Lisa, I'm thinking investors being empowered as well, right? To practice the gender lens. It has to go way more than throwing money at founders, and that is precisely the reason why I'm an ex-VC. I didn't see the pathway to real change. And when it comes to Indigenous women, we're a lot of investors are sat here in Singapore, in our developed country, and investing in impact is a somewhat cognitive exercise, unless we have had the benefit of working in the field. And then when we are talking to entrepreneurs who look different, who sound different, who probably don't speak English as their first language, and who have very different lives, like that ability to trust or to say, can I risk capital? I think that whole approach is that underpinning the investment approach is needs some rethinking for the capital to really work the way that we want it to. Not to pile on the depressive world, right? But I think it's sort of two very different perspectives that I wanted to paint. So what gets investors writing checks that I've seen, and this is in the private sector, is less about the impact, who's doing the real work and who's in the community and able to make things happen, but it's more appearance, headline driven, FOMO driven than the substance. And this obsession around short-term growth, fast growing, TAM, what's your TAM? I think that's one kind of thing that we have worshipped and organized capital around. But we're also, I think, waking up to the value of resilient local businesses, right? If COVID and even the current war is saying anything about that, like there is some value to investing locally and deeply, and that work takes time to build, easy to replace, but hard to rebuild, which, I think we can actually start to quantify and see the economic impact and experience that today. So I think that, in short, and to use another tagline, you don't just add women and stir in any of this, right? To really build circularity and restorative use of resources, natural or human or financial, is that transformation in mindset and the willingness to transform at every level, investor, entrepreneur, possibly even at the beneficiary or consumer level.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm going to pick up on Vinosha's question and add to it as well. So she thinks that's a very good point. And how do we change the investor bias? I'll add to that, when we're talking about restorative investing and valuing the women at the grassroots levels because they are building a resilient community, and there's value to that, right? There's the value to the impact of that. Is it a different type of investor, and how can we find those investors?
It is a new pool, right? A new way of thinking about investing that has not been popularized before. But I'm seeing peer-to-peer lending, which used to be done just in communities. No one wrote about it because that's just the way it was. And hearing and seeing that at work is part of the education or the socialization of alternative finance models. I don't know that this is overnight work, or kind of like let's buy into crypto the same way as we buy into restorative financing. But yeah, it's people like all of us here on this call who are listening too, right? That can play a part.
Vinosha, do you want to jump in and add to that question if you feel that?
No, thanks, Gail. I mean, it's a great perspective. I've been in the finance industry, and where I come from, I used to give loans to small businesses, and these sort of perspectives are not really taken into consideration even today in the traditional finance sense. So how do we change that? I mean, it's going to, and it's good to say a few of us, but I think we have to have a far further reach. We have to shout out and get more people on board to do this. And I guess whether it's an investor, whether it's a lender, just changing that perspective is going to take a long time. But unless we all start and get together and make a lot of noise, it's not going to happen.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's how do we unlock and show the value as well, because investors are coming traditionally from financial numbers, right? And then when they look at ESG, it's like, oh, let me report some ESG there, let me report some impact, or let me report some CSR work. We haven't integrated it where there is actually value to the social impact. It's value to that women grassroots, keeping her community together through COVID, like Gail said, right? And because of this mathematical silo difference, it becomes a little bit challenging. So at Angels of Impact, we decided that there's a huge cognitive dissonance between someone who comes from an investor perspective wanting financial returns. And we realized that a philanthropist tends to look at social impact. And it's a little easier to get them to see how they could do restorative investing than getting a traditional investor to come to risk. So that's just been our experience. I don't know if Lisa and Gail want to jump in from your experience.
I think that's why I'm at the nexus of spirituality and finance too, right? I think whatever investor you are, whether you're a $1 billion family office or a regular person, middle class person, it's the cognitive dissonance is money and person is person, right? And what do I want my life to count as? She made, triple-digit returns. Is that what you want on your tombstone? I think it's like putting uncomfortable questions like that out there to kind of wake people up to what we're swimming in. I mean, it took me years, right, of unlearning. And unlearning things I didn't expect to have to unlearn, like power and privilege, as well as kind of the invisible hand and fundamental economic principles. But I don't know that there's a shortcut, but yes, being really loud and making people uncomfortable seems to be an important piece of the journey.
Absolutely. Lorraine has, I think, put her hand up. Do you want to jump in, Lorraine?
Oh, hang on.
It's okay.
You have to unmute yourself.
You are unmuted. We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Well, what we've done, because there's a big disconnect between the monetary value of something and so what, my objective isn't to make money. Yes, but by returning those funds, and this is what I did with the state government, we actually accrued everything to then redeploy into social outcomes, i.e. healthcare and social services for childcare, right? Understanding those elements. So when you picture book the impact of bottom line impact, which is just automation, right? But then the top line impact, which is redefining the business model, i.e. turning what they're doing manually into digital so that they're minimizing and then driving that value. And you might say, wow, that goes to the P&L, but actually no, even driving sustainable outcomes can also contribute to whereby which you're driving community projects. I'm not going to name names, but we have one community one in Southeast Asia, which is doing a whole returnable bottles thing. And we're actually highlighting that in these returnables, they can be employing local people to their bottling operations and creating community social economic outcomes. and we can be feeding that into the digital platform so they can instantly report that through to government as an objective and ESG target. So it's by walking them through this each step of their process and showing them where saving 1%, 2%, 3% here, yes, it has monetary value, but why don't we connect that directly to a social outcome or an economical outcome for women with disabilities? I mean, one of the objectives we took for this company is employing disabilities workers. It can be done.
Laureen.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to note that there are initiatives to try to give value to the social impact.
And these are big brands, by the way. These are big brand names, and we've been hampering on the sustainability outcomes and social requirements. So they're beginning to see the value.
Great, thank you, thank you. Well, we're actually coming up towards the end of our conversation in a way, but I can keep it going if everybody is willing to stay on. But one of the questions I wanted to also have Gail and Lisa also look at it was, I think, Lisa, when we were talking about the preparatory, we got into conversations around blended finance, for example, right? So as much as we talk about a different type of investor or a different mindset, we're also talking about different instruments, right? So I don't know if both of you would like to talk a little bit about new forms of instruments. Lisa, do you want to go first?
Well, yes. Actually, the reason why we introduced or developed the benchmarks for transformational partnerships and women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains is to provide a missing tool, I think, for investors, for SMEs, corporates, agricultural value chain program holders, to actually look at the lens of women and men small scale producers, right? Because most of the time investing is about, the lens of the investor, right? So we actually have found that there is interest in changing mindsets, but beyond that, people ask, how do we do it? Yeah. And I think that's where the tools are very important. And we started in agricultural value chains because I think this is where we can make a big impact on many grassroots women in developing countries. And we are still in the piloting stage with corporates. We have done a piloting stage with SMEs and social enterprises, and we're ready to actually roll it out in a big way. But we need social investors, if you may, to actually help us roll it out in a big way, because given the challenges of the pandemic, as an SME, will not invest in, practicing a set of benchmarks and tools as a priority, because they are in a mindset of wanting to recover, right? So they spend all their resources they can have a hands on in terms of their recovery, because they don't really see the connection yet between inclusive recovery and doing business responsibly and doing business better, right? So in that sense, I think we need investors. I think Gail made that point, no? Investors need to have a gender transformative lens for us to succeed in this endeavor.
Thank you. So your platform will be one way in which people can share tools and learn and help to bring this about.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
Gail?
I don't know, Laina, if you want me to share a bit about the CEO practices.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that's powerful validation too for Angels of Impact in this region, right? So I'm part of CEO, which is a global network that has been giving out 0% loans to female founders of SDG forward companies. They're 0% loans. They're very simple loan agreements, unlike kind of what is traditionally done. And just about everything about the process there is also non-traditional. Activators, people like you and me, we give money and we vote for these ventures. And the word due diligence isn't even used in the process. So, and surprisingly, to folks in traditional finance, the payback rate is 98%. So it really kind of brings into question, do we need 40-page loan agreements and this painful diligence process to make it work, to make finance work for everyone involved? Or what's the secret sauce? And I would say for CEO, it's really about trust and relationship, and a parallel to the character-based lending that Angels does, right? That's what makes it work. The payback rate is high because ventures are also activators and they know the people they've taken money from, and it matters to them. I think that's a really powerful alternative example of what could be possible, right? And over 6 years, $7 million have been loaned out and repaid to 107 ventures at CEO. So that's it's not sort of a one-off thing. And actually, we have been doing that in our communities, untracked, perhaps, undocumented. Back in for the Chinese, it was the Samsui ladies. I know that this is practiced in many communities in multiple continents as well.
Yeah, Maddie just pulled up also a question from the audience about, Maddie, do you want to say it? To Gail, I think about money and.
Sure, thanks Gail and Dr. Dacanay for sharing your thoughts. Gail, because you had mentioned reconciling money and person, or rather that there is a cognitive dissonance between the two, I'm just curious to know your thoughts on whether you think that the drive towards money and power is timeless, and not that there's a dichotomy here, but given the attention that's been put on climate change recently, and then with that, things like ESG investing, alternative finance, civic participation in general, whether that changes the mindset of the younger generation that is then entering the workforce. And if so, what effect will that have on kind of our hope for reconciling money and people in the future?
I had an interesting conversation with my daughter a couple of weeks ago, where she was asking about why is this Ukraine war happening, right? And in very simplistic and selective terms, I said, well, some people think it's about energy independence. And we got into the conversation around hoarding and accumulation and why is that important. And to her, she just couldn't understand why you would take and deprive others so you can feel safer or you can be richer. And at one point she asked, so is it just because, did they do this just because they want to have more money? And that came to mind as you were asking your question, right? It's how we parent, because like we grew up in capitalist principles, unless you were living under a rock or in a commune. We were swimming in it that we don't even see it. So it is as much about directing capital, personal or otherwise, but also these conversations and what we are telling our children to value. It's I think about this every day, right? You're living in a world that's pushing for a certain definition of success, and I'm consciously introducing new definitions to challenge that. And the same with how we view money, what's it for, and how we want to use it.
Yeah, one of the things we found with Angels of Impact, and also when I was chairing a restorative investing task force, I asked this question as well, is your typical investor who will come in with this difference is someone who feels they've had enough. They have enough. There's some abundance mindset, right? So it doesn't mean it's the ultra high net worth philanthropist who is giving money towards restorative investing and grassroots. It's the person who feels they have enough. And it could be someone who just has a little bit of disposable income and they're willing to give it away because they think they have enough. So on that note, we are coming to the end. I would like to have Gail and Lisa give some closing remarks. And unless there's any dire questions, please put it in the chat so that I can make sure to include you before we close off. Gail first and then Lisa.
Sure thing. So I was recently meeting up with a friend of mine who was also an intern of mine when I was at an investment bank. And he was asking, what are you doing these days? And I shared about my involvement with Angels of Impact. And I could literally see this huge question mark over his head, right? Because he continued in the kind of free markets pathway. And when I said restorative investing, non-extractive funding, he kind of laughed and said, isn't that the whole point of business, to extract value? And then he went to say, I'm glad you're doing that. So, so I feel like that captures where we are today and what's possible, right? A lot of this is just ignorance. Like, we may not realize what we're party to, what we're participant to. And I've had that whole journey of unlearning, and that will continue, no doubt. But yes, to challenge truths that we take for granted, like, you know, interminable growth, or the invisible hand, or internalized racism, or privilege, like those are not easy things to do, like in your head. It can really threaten like who we are and what we've built our lives around. And so I would, as someone who's done that, a lot of it in my head, but lucky enough to meet people like Laina and my CEO sisters, for example, it's really about doing it in community, right? And doing it with practitioners. And so I would invite you to consider the question, and also invite you to consider that with others. How would you use your money? Is money money, or is it nutrients? Is it medicine, as Laina said earlier? How will you use your money? And will you use it to enrich self, or to enrich in other ways? And I guess it would be remiss for me to not leave a parting word on an invitation to do it with a community like ours at Angels. And, you know, there are also other people who are looking at restorative finance from so many different perspectives, right? I've come across people who are doing it from the agricultural lens only, who are doing it from a spiritual lens. So there is a movement, and, you know, it's not the easiest work to integrate it all. But that's ultimately, you're going to ask yourself what's going to be like your tombstone, like, what did I use my money for? And yes, some of it is to kind of fund life and make things happen, put your kids through school and all of that. But there is also kind of the spirit of how we undertake our money. So I would leave you with that kind of slightly uncomfortable question, but know that there are lots of people who are looking at that too, and finding new ways about it.
Wow. Very powerful words. Thank you, Gail. Lisa.
I guess as a parting shot, I would like to reiterate the importance of, I think, a balance of transactional and transformational outcomes and services provided to women entrepreneurs, as well as women at the grassroots. So I think that the social entrepreneurship mindset is, in a sense, trying to do that balance, right? Because social entrepreneurship, I mean, I've taught social entrepreneurship in business and management schools, and we usually characterize it at the management level, at the micro level, as the art of managing multiple bottom lines, right? Mm-hmm. So I think restorative financing needs to actually learn the art of managing these multiple bottom lines that are very important for a more sustainable future and a more sustainable world. So I guess I am an advocate of ethical markets. I'm an advocate of mindful markets. So I guess impact on social investors and restorative financing investors, if you may, need to look at not just what the market needs, but really building ethical and mindful markets. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have transformational, we have thinking about your tombstone. How do you want to be remembered? what the world needs and how can we actually add to that.